Thank you very much. So the theme for this afternoon, for all the sessions this afternoon, is upgrading our society. And I will speak on a certain aspect of that, and that is the role that I think that personal development and inner growth plays in upgrading our society. I also think that personal development and inner growth plays a very, very central role when it comes to peaceful transitions of society. And I want to start by returning to and connecting to some of the most powerful presentations that we have heard during the last 48 hours. I'm thinking of Vivian's presentation this morning when she stressed the importance of us all connecting with an inner purpose, to be able to know what we want to use all these wonderful technology and opportunities that are opening up for. I also in particular want to connect to David's presentation last evening, which really touched me profoundly. He was talking there about the biggest regrets of the dying. And as number one regret, he put on the slide there that it is that one would have wished to have had the courage not to live the life of others, the others' expectations, but really have had the power to live one's own life. And to take that step from starting life, and when we start life, we naturally live the life of our family, of our parents, of society, and of our peers. And that is how we must start our life. But at some point, at least for many of us, but in many cases way too late in life, we come to this point where we realize that we want to live our own lives and that we want to become authors of our own lives in a much deeper sense. And some psychologists call that we become inner-directed or self-authoring. And that is a very important step in the leapfrogging of ourselves, as we were talking about yesterday. And I also want to connect this with the quote of Robert Kennedy that David also put on the slides, saying that this becoming inner-directed is the one essential vital quality for those who seek to change a world which yields most painfully to change. And here we can see the connection between our inner personal development and societal change. And it's really that connection that my foundation has been trying to pursue during the last 10 years. If we start with the inner side, talking about the inner development, we can talk in very, very many different languages. David was using yesterday the language of character and character development. I would like here to use the language that perhaps adult developmental psychologists are using and talk about transformative skills. And I have here listed 5 groups, clusters of transformative inner skills that many believe are crucial for us to be able, as individuals, to navigate this increasingly complex world. The exponential technology development is increasing complexity in the world in many ways. It's not just technological complexity that is increasing. Also, dynamic complexity is increasing. The fact that development is going quicker and quicker all the time is creating complexity in itself. And also with a shrinking world, we have the aspects of cultural or subjective complexity that becomes increasingly important. We need all these different groups of inner skills in order to be able to live and thrive as individuals in this exponential society. The good news here is that science is telling us that all of these abilities, skills, is something that we can develop. We are not born with a certain amount of openness, meaning-making in a complex world, perspective-seeking, self-leadership, finding our inner compass and purpose, or compassion. We are not born with a certain amount of compassion. We can increase our compassion. We can expand it to larger and larger circles. That is the good news. The bad news is that we cannot just learn these in a traditional way. Developing these skills all include deeper psychological transformations that basically needs transformative, immersive experiences. And here we heard both yesterday and today that both artificial intelligence and perhaps also virtual reality can actually help us achieve those experiences and help us gaining more of these transformative skills. So if that is from a theoretical perspective, from a practical perspective, we have our island outside Stockholm called the Oak Island, headquartered, where we're actually trying to do this practically. Every summer, we have a number of youth camps where adolescents are trying to find themselves and to develop themselves in these dimensions. The rest of the year, we have retreats, weekend retreats for adults, or invitational conferences where we invite scientists to dive deeper into these questions. But I will use the main part of these 20 minutes that I've been given to speak about a specific case study. It's a case study that we have documented in a book called The Nordic Secret that I have just published together with my Danish co-author and friend Lena Andersen. And this book explores how do successful societies adapt to an exponentially changing world. And specifically, it looks at the very successful transition of all the Nordic countries going from a pre-modern into a modern society. If you look at the cover there, we have some symbols for various aspects of this transition. But we have a woman up there on the left. It's a black American woman. And I will leave you to think about what is she doing there. What is she doing on a book about the Nordic transition from pre-modernity to modernity. And I will come back to that at the end of my presentation. It's perhaps not easy to understand and imagine, but just 100 years ago, 150 years ago, all the Nordic countries were amongst the poorest, non-democratic, agrarian, religious countries in Europe. We were on the cold and poor northern outskirts of Europe. People were actually starving and freezing to death in the winters. During the last couple of decennia at the end of the 1800s, up to 20% of our working population emigrated to the US due to miserable circumstances in Sweden. But then, just a few decades later, even before the Second World War, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden had all ended up at the top of the list of the richest, happiest, most stable industrial democracies in the world. How did this happen? How did this transition go so quick and peaceful compared to many other countries, not the least in Europe? And what can we learn from this transition when we now today are facing an equally large societal transition, this time from national industrial societies into a global digitalized world? In times of uncertainty and rapid change, like now, we all humans tend to turn towards an external authority, something or someone outside of ourselves that we can rely on and put our trust in. It could be in a religion, it could be an ideology, it could be an authoritarian leader. We did it back then, and we are doing it today again. But 150 years ago, we had in all Scandinavian countries very visionary leaders who were totally committed to building strong, modern, democratic societies. And they knew that in order to build strong democracies, they need to be built from bottom up. And in order for that to happen, they realized that they needed to empower lots of people in society to actually find themselves, to find their inner compass, to grow and mature so that they could become active and conscious co-creators of the emerging new society. So how did they do that? Back then, they didn't have any help from artificial intelligence or from virtual reality. So what they did was that they created retreat centers for personal growth. Yes, you heard me right. Retreat centers for personal growth. And they did this all over Scandinavia. So, starting in the 1860s in Denmark, and then it moved to Norway, and then into Sweden. And this grew rapidly over the last decades of the 1800s. So at year 1900, there were already 100 retreat centers of this kind in Denmark, 75 in Norway, and 150 in Sweden. These centers later became state-funded, but never state-run or state-organized or managed. At these centers, young adults in their 20s, most of them having a few years of work experience, mainly from the working or farming part of the population, could spend up to 6 months in retreat. Small groups, 20, 30, 40 people. 6 months in an immersive, transformative experience with the explicit goal for them to find their inner compass, to be enough grounded in themselves to become inner directed, or at least start the journey towards becoming inner directed. This was not a question of being politically indoctrinated. When this was at its height, about 100 years ago, actually 10% of each young generation of Scandinavians went to one of these immersive retreats. In addition to finding their inner compass, the retreat gave the participants knowledge about the new technologies, so that everyone should feel that they could actually embrace the new technologies that were coming to the Scandinavian countries and not be afraid of them. It also gave the participants a sense of their place in culture and in history, and it gave them basic tools for organizing civic society. So we can ask, where did these, even for our radical ideas, come from? Well, they came from the idealist philosophers. Back then we didn't have any psychologists, so human nature was for the philosophers to think about. And these idealist philosophers like Schiller and Goethe here, Herder, von Humboldt, Hegel, they were all writing after the Enlightenment revolution. And they were all reacting to the Enlightenment view of our mind as a rational machine that is ready when we are 20 or something like that, and then nothing happens. They said, that is not the case. Our mind is actually a complex, organic, self-developing system that is under constant development throughout our lives. And that development can either be supported and facilitated, or it can be hindered. This evolutionary perspective of our mind, that we could say replaced an old linear thinking, machine thinking. This is the exponential, evolutionary perspective of our mind. They actually gave a name. They called that Bildung. And it was this view of the importance of the development of our mind, and especially the step which these philosophers pointed out of becoming self-authoring, inner-directed, that these leading politicians and intellectuals in Scandinavia fully understood and fully implemented. So to conclude, it was through massive effort of helping a lot of people finding their inner compass and increase the complexity of their mind so that they could actually hold this transition into a new society that made it possible for the Scandinavian societies to develop that rapidly. Now I believe that we are in a similar situation in the world. We are at the end of the modern era. We might even call this end of the modern era post-modernity. And in this post-modern time, we see a lot of crises out there in the world. But I don't think that these are different crises. I think that these are symptoms of one underlying meta-crisis of our time. And that meta-crisis is our both individual but certainly collective inability to handle the increasing complexity of our world. So we are again at a position where people feel disoriented, where we feel uncertainty, and we are looking for some authority outside us to guide us through this. Do you think it would be possible for us again to be able to face this challenge and in a conscious way move us towards a new society? A society that is beyond modernity, that might be equally different from modernity, like modernity was different from the pre-modern society. We might call that society a meta-modern society. I believe that that is possible. But here is my important point, and what we learn from the Nordic Secret. This new upgraded meta-modern society will not happen automatically. Nor will it happen because an elite creates it. That will never be stable. This society will only be possible to create if we all act as conscious co-creators of this society. And that co-creation is going to involve a lot of inner personal development. There is nobody else out there who is going to do this for us. It is up to us all here to accept that responsibility. To accept the responsibility, as many speakers have said during these days, to accept the responsibility of creating this future. And I cannot think for myself of any better personal purpose in life than accepting that responsibility and consciously and actively work on creating our future. So, back to the picture. So who is she? Anyone? Rosa Parks. So David yesterday spoke about Rosa Parks, the woman on the bus that refused to obey the law and give up her seat, and that inspired the civil rights movement in the US. So why is he on the cover of this book? She's on the cover of this book because she has said in many interviews that what gave her the inner strength to know that even if the law of the land said that she should yield her place to the white man, she knew that she should keep her seat. What gave her that inner strength was the fact that she had participated in one of these 6-month Scandinavian retreats. Not in Scandinavia, but in Tennessee. So in the 20s, an American guy called Miles Horton went to Denmark for a year, researched the concept, and went back to the US and started 4 retreat centers like this. And the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, where Rosa Parks participated, was one of them. Thank you very much.